Hello, friends, and welcome back to another round of stories about entitled people. Our next story is a wild one. A family moves next to the Amish and thinks they've hit the quiet neighbor lottery, but soon the knocks start. First for phone calls, then for favors, then for freezer space. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. All right, let's get into it. When can I use your phone becomes can I use your life? When the Amish family bought the farm next to ours, we thought we'd hit the neighbor jackpot. They were quiet, polite, hardworking. We figured it'd be nice having folks next door who didn't throw loud parties or blast music at midnight. At first, it was even charming. They'd stop by, hat in hand, asking to use the phone. I didn't mind. I worked nights back then, so sometimes I'd still be awake when they came knocking. It felt almost quaint, like living next to time travelers. But the novelty wore off fast. Before long, they started showing up at 6 in the morning. 6 on my day off. I'd open the door half asleep, and there they'd be, the husband and sometimes his brother, saying their ride was late and they needed to make a quick call. That quick call turned into him spreading paperwork across my dining table like he was running a telemarketing firm. I'd try to sip coffee while he made business calls for an hour, notebook out, speaking in that slow, deliberate tone that made every minute drag. Finally, my wife and I set a boundary. We told them it was too much, that they couldn't just walk over anytime they wanted. They nodded, apologized, and then asked if they could build a phone booth on our property. I said no, politely, firmly. That didn't stop the emergency calls. They'd knock anyway. If it wasn't about the phone, it was asking for a ride, or if they could use our Amazon account, or if we could print something. Every time we said no, another request appeared a few days later, repackaged as something urgent. Trying to keep the peace, I eventually came up with what I thought was a smart compromise. I set up an old cell phone in a waterproof box near the edge of the yard, powered by my Wi-Fi. It worked fine until the battery died. Then they'd show up again, knocking to ask if I could charge it. And while they were at it, could they use our freezer to store some ice cream they'd just bought? Ice cream! I hesitated, but my wife's heart is bigger than her patience, and she didn't want it to melt. So we said sure. Then came a turkey. Then the suggestion that maybe they could buy a freezer and keep it in our basement for convenience. When his wife started showing up at 6 a.m. on Sundays demanding her turkey back for Sunday dinner, that was it. We redrew the line. No more favors. The path from their buggy to that Wi-Fi phone had worn the grass down to bare dirt by that point. Then one day the phone died completely. He showed up at the door holding the box like a dead pet and said, "I can't buy another one, but you could buy one for me." That was when I decided I'd had enough. I told him calmly but firmly that he'd have to find another arrangement. He left without a word, and for a while the only interaction we had was when their horses clopped past. The women who used to wave started turning their backs when they went by, pretending they didn't see us. A month later, he came back with an offer. He'd started selling handmade sheds and said if I helped him by listing them on Facebook Marketplace, he'd give me a commission. I hesitated. I needed the cash, so I agreed. The catch, he needed somewhere to put his phone booth. That's how I ended up with what looked like a wooden outhouse sitting on the corner of my property. I went to Verizon, got him one of those wireless landlines, and he rigged it up to a car battery. Twice a week, I'd have to charge that battery for him because apparently even off-grid living needs an extension cord to civilization. I'll admit, selling Amish sheds was easy money at first. I'd take calls, answer questions, and forward buyers his way. The problem was if a customer forgot to mention my name, he'd claim he didn't owe me anything. Still, the extra income helped, so I put up with it. Every time his phone booth glitched, I'd spend hours on hold with Verizon while he stood there, hat in hand, pretending to look concerned. Then came the next twist. He told me that the church elders had decided the phone booth was too close to his home and made him look bad. They said it needed to be moved somewhere more private, like behind my shed, farther from the road. I told him if the elders have a problem with the phone booth, they can come talk to me themselves. They never did. After about 8 months, he stopped paying me altogether. I figured maybe he was busy and we'd settle later, but he kept showing up with his car battery, dropping it off when I was asleep and picking it up before I left for work. He was still late on the phone payments, which were on my credit card, by the way. Eventually, I caught him one afternoon and asked where my money was. He launched into some story about losing his order book while visiting family, claimed he didn't know which orders were mine, didn't have records of deposits, and he'd found someone else to post listings for free. I told him flat out I expected to be paid. He said, I'll see what I can do. A month later, he handed me a few $100 out of roughly $3,000 he owed. I told him I'd be disconnecting his phone and that he wasn't welcome to come over anymore. And that was the end of it. The phone was shut off, the booth stood empty, and the grass finally started growing back over the path that had been beaten into my lawn. Look, I know not every Amish person is like that, but if you're ever tempted to be the helpful neighbor, take it from me. Don't volunteer to be their Wi-Fi, their freezer, and their customer service rep. They won't mean to, but they'll use you until you burn out. Our other neighbors told them no from the start. I wish we had too. This is what happens when you try to be too nice to people who don't even own light switches. Like, how did "can I borrow your phone" turn into "can I store my turkey in your freezer and run a business from your yard"? And I get it, you didn't want to be rude, but these folks turned your house into a 24-hour customer service line, and you became the Wi-Fi, the battery backup, the Amazon Prime, and the freezer section. That's not helping your neighbor, that's unpaid IT support for a horse-drawn startup. And our next story. Lowest possible fare, lowest possible rate. Back before cell phones and TSA checkpoints, I was working as an admin assistant. Ray was my department head and had a great sense of humor. When I was hired on, Ray made sure I understood that I worked for him. Even though I would do some office-wide work, he was my boss. Clint was in charge of another department in our office. Flying from our office to a satellite office for a day or two was common for people in both departments, and I was in charge of making standard pre-approved travel arrangements. If someone needed a change unexpectedly, they were supposed to handle those themselves. Clint seemed unable to understand that. At some point, Clint decided that he wanted to cut travel costs, lowest possible fare, lowest possible rate for his departure. Lowest possible fares were always the 5 a.m. outbound and 11 p.m. return flights. Clint didn't care. A couple weeks into this policy, Clint is to head to the satellite office for some in-person meetings. Game on. Lowest possible fare, lowest possible rate. Clint left on the 5 a.m. flight. The lowest rate car rental company didn't keep their cars available at the airport. Clint had to take the shuttle to their off-site location to pick up his car. Sadly for Clint, the shuttle didn't start running until 8 when his first meeting was scheduled to start. Oops. The client refused to reschedule that day but agreed to the next morning. At some point, it dawned on Clint that he either had to fly home and back or get a room for the night. He chose to get a room and, of course, call me. One lowest possible rate room coming up. Unsurprisingly, that room didn't have security on site like he was used to. It did have little multi-legged friends, if his complaints were true. The next morning, Clint headed out in the previous day's suit, only to discover that his car had been broken into overnight. The police took their time arriving, and by the time they were done, Clint had missed his meeting again. Somehow, Clint got the client to reschedule again, and he decided to take the flight home and back the next day. Of course, I was kind enough to remember the lowest possible fare rule, so Clint was booked on the 11 p.m. flights home and 5 a.m. return, even though his meeting was midday. This time, the lowest rate car was at the airport, so Clint got to skip the shuttle. Can't win them all. At that point, Clint's lowest possible policy had already cost the company at least double what a normal trip would have, not to mention all the time I'd spent calling hotels, motels, and car rental companies. The next day, he's on the 5 a.m. flight and makes it to his meeting. I don't know when he realized that he didn't want the lowest possible fare at 11 p.m. I do know he decided to take the more expensive earlier flight home, both days. Somehow he discovered that he could change that himself. The next time I saw Clint, he tried to fire me. Too bad I worked for Ray, who knew and laughed about the whole thing. Clint was furious, but there wasn't anything he could do. The company would back Ray, and Ray was backing me. Clint changed the room rate policy because of his experience, but refused to rescind the lowest fare and lowest rental rate policy. That was until accounting let slip that not only had Clint figured out how to take the higher-priced earlier flight, he figured out an upgraded seat as well. Clint found himself with an entire department intentionally missing their 5 a.m. flights and rebooking for the more expensive 8 a.m., which somehow only had upgraded seats available every time. Rental car reservations were missed and more expensive cars were rented. Meetings that were previously in the office were somehow only available after hours, so clients were taken to dinner. Dinner included alcohol, so rooms were booked at hotels closest to the restaurants and returning flights scheduled for the next day. Less than a month later, all lowest price policies were rescinded. I was allowed to book normally again, and the missed flights, upgraded seats, and fancy hotels disappeared. Dinner meetings remained, but decreased dramatically. When I left, Clint's reputation still hadn't recovered. People like Clint are too stupid to realize what the objective is for these client meetings. Namely, it's to seal the deal, not penny pinch to save the company money. Travel expenses are a write-off. Making it harder to travel for your employees doesn't help seal the deal. And our next story. The HOA tried to charge me for 50 years of dues on a non-member property. When my parents passed, I inherited their old lakeside house in New Hampshire, a weathered 1920s cottage with a creaky porch, wood stove, and more character than comfort. It's been in my family for generations, long before the neighborhood's HOA formed in the 1950s. The best part, the deed explicitly included an easement for dock access and private beach rights. The HOA had no jurisdiction over our property, and for decades, everyone knew it. My parents lived there for 50 years and never once paid HOA dues. They didn't have to. They weren't members. The HOA didn't even exist when the house was built. It was a simple arrangement. We helped pay for dock maintenance since we used it, but that was it. My parents even had a handshake agreement with the HOA president back in the 1970s that confirmed it. No monthly dues, no meetings, no neighborhood beautification fees. Back then, my dad was a proud, stubborn man who loved his boat more than he loved most people. When he and Mom first tried to use the community dock under their easement, the HOA told them they'd have to wait for a slip to open up. Fair enough. They waited patiently and after 2 years finally got one. But just as they were settling in, the HOA got greedy. They tried to rekey the dock gate, claimed the boat couldn't be there without paying full HOA dues, and even tried to have it towed once. That didn't go well for him. My dad had a lawyer friend who loved to fight HOAs for sport. It ended with a formal settlement. Our family would pay dock maintenance fees only and have full access under our easement. No HOA membership required. A handshake followed, and that was the end of it. Until I inherited the house. A few months after I moved in, I got my first friendly letter from the HOA. It started with the usual, "Welcome to the neighborhood" fluff, then quickly shifted tone. Our records show that your property has unpaid dues dating back to 1976. Please remit payment of $27,940.68 within 30 days to avoid legal action. I thought it was a joke. I called the number on the letter, and the woman on the line said very cheerfully, "Oh no, this is quite serious." I explained that my house wasn't part of the HOA and hadn't been since before their charter even existed. She didn't care. "Well, new management's cleaning up old records," she said, "and everyone in the area benefits from HOA services. You'll need to pay your fair share." My fair share? Lady, I mow my lawn, plow my own driveway, and fix my own septic. The only thing I ever used was the damn dock, which I already paid for upkeep on. So I sent them a copy of the deed, clearly showing the easement. I also contacted 2 former HOA board members, both retired and happy to confirm the decades-old handshake agreement in writing. One even gave me an old scanned document from the 1980s showing the arrangement was legally acknowledged. Did the HOA care? Of course not. They doubled down, sent me another letter claiming previous management made unauthorized arrangements and demanded full dues plus interest. Then they locked the dock gate again. That was their last mistake. I lawyered up. My attorney, an older guy who practically radiated disdain for HOAs, was giddy when I showed him the paperwork. "They don't have a leg to stand on," he said. "They're about to lose a lot more than a gate lock." The case went to court. The HOA tried to argue that my parents' agreement wasn't valid under the new bylaws, but the judge shut that down almost immediately. He pointed out the obvious. The HOA didn't even exist when the easement was written, and the agreement for dock upkeep fees had been honored for 50 years. The court reaffirmed my right to dock access without HOA membership, and even noted that their attempts to block my access were a breach of easement rights. They were furious. I could tell from the way the HOA president, a guy who looked like he's been waiting his whole life to say, according to Section 3, Paragraph 12, stormed out of the courtroom afterward. A few weeks later, I filed a simple construction permit with the county. The HOA couldn't stop it. The land and shoreline were mine. Within 2 months, I'd hired a contractor, and together we built my own private dock right next to the HOA's. When it was done, I put up a little wooden sign that read, "The HOA president came by, fuming, and yelled across the fence that I couldn't just go rogue." I smiled and told him to check the court record. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.